My name is Dr. Gavin Reid, and I'm currently sitting in Edinburgh in Scotland. And I must apologise for not being there in person, but some situation and circumstances prevented me from being there today. But I hope that this video presentation does something to help in any case. So I'm going to start with my first slide, which is the title of the talk. And the title is Dyslexia, Good Practice in an Inclusive Setting. And I'm really using the information for my talk this afternoon, I'm using information from my experiences as a professional teacher and a psychologist in about 8 different countries which I've worked in over the last 25 years. I'm based by an educational psychologist, but I'm also a teacher. So I've identified quite a number of, I think, good practice or some core values which I think are important for dealing with dyslexic children. So I'm going to just move to the second slide, which is the 4 key points which I think are important when we're trying to make accommodations and develop good teaching approaches for children with dyslexia. And these 4 points are, firstly, effective learning. All children with dyslexia, and adults as well, need to be able to learn effectively and efficiently. And sometimes they can't do that. Often they need a lot of support and structure, and even then, they sometimes take very long routes to get to the answer. So I think the first thing is to try to help them become a better learner, a more efficient learner. The second point I want to make is I want to show you some examples of a conceptual understanding of dyslexia. What is dyslexia? What are the core points in dyslexia? Thirdly, I would like to look at some strategies and some programs which I feel are probably some of the better ones for dyslexia. And the last point I want to make is about the learner. And it's very important that the learner is able to use his or her preferred learning approach, that we as teachers are able to construct an optimum learning environment for that child. Because the environment and the learning preferences and learning styles will make that person a better learner if they are conducive to their learning style. So I think the whole learning environment is very important as well. Now, I mentioned earlier on that effective learning is the key point. And there's 4 points here about effective learning. One is independence. What we need to do is to help the learner with dyslexia become more self-sufficient and more in control of their own learning. Because it's too easy to give them support. It's too easy for them to rely on a teacher or a specialist teacher. So we need to see how we could give them ownership and to give them control over their own learning, so that they take that responsibility. And I think that's a very important point to be aware of. And you'll notice the third point on the screen there is active and interactive. And if we look at the most efficient and effective methods of teaching children with dyslexia, we will find they all involve some activity, either doing something or saying something. They will not learn by listening. They will not learn as being a passive learner. Because if you're speaking to them, they're only going to get a tiny fraction of that. Because they do have an auditory processing difficulty. So they will learn better, more effective, if they're actually doing something like drama activities, some games, or even discussion. The interaction of discussion will help them to become more aware and to help them understand what they're trying to learn. And the fourth point, which is also very important, is that the task, what we ask them to do, what we give them, must be achievable. They must be able to do it. Now, if they can't do it, we've got to differentiate further and further and make it simpler and simpler so they can do it. We've got to get that first step, and then that leads to the second step and the third step. So the key for us as teachers is that we need to ensure that differentiation is effective. I've got here that inclusion is a process. Now, a process means that they might not they might not be able to fit in to a mainstream inclusive school right away. They might need a unit. They might need some specialist provision first. So that's the process. It could be specialist provision, and then maybe a unit, and then mainstream school, or all three. But inclusion is that process where we are gradually accommodating to their needs. And that is a social, emotional, as well as educational needs. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what I tend to look at when I'm trying to identify the best kind of program for children with dyslexia, I want to know what their problem is. Because being dyslexic doesn't tell you what the problem is. It doesn't tell you what the barrier is. It's an umbrella term. It's a kind of a broad concept. So I need to look at exactly what's preventing that child from learning. And every child is different. And that applies to dyslexia. So you could have 2 or 3 children with dyslexia in your class, but they could all have a slightly different profile. So we need to know something about that. So I like to identify what their barriers is. It could be social barriers, like there could be lack of confidence. And yes, I do assessments here and elsewhere. And yesterday I had a little girl here who was actually very, very bright and very able, and she was really able to do most of the things. But I could see at a glance right away that she was suffering from lack of confidence, that sometimes she wouldn't even try, and she needed all that encouragement. And when she got it, she was able to do it. So it could be lack of confidence, it could be low self-esteem, it could be bad experiences in the past. So we need to look at the social and the emotional side when we're looking at barriers to learning. It could be that they're showing a lot of signs of stress or anxiety. Or it could be, and more likely will be, some cognitive barriers in terms of short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, processing speed. They're poor and maybe not very efficient learning strategies. I mean, all that would be cognition. That's how you think and how you process. And we need to look in detail at how that child with dyslexia processes information, because there's a chance they're not doing it very well. And that's where the problem could lie. Or it could just be in the classroom, in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the classroom environment. The task isn't appropriate. We need to differentiate more. Maybe the expectations of the curriculum is too high, too fast. The pace is too fast. We need to maybe ensure that we've got more time to complete a task before they go on to the next task. So in a nutshell, I'm just going to give you some key points here. I'm not going to go through all of those points. You've got the handout. But I think one of the second point there I would like to just highlight, that dyslexia can be minimized through strategies and accommodations. So it's not a case of you're going to find one thing and it's going to cure and it's going to get rid of dyslexia. That will not happen. There's a number of strategies that we need to try, and often it's trial and error. And it could be, the kind of things I've mentioned, like drama or games or tactile kind of activities, or discussion. And then the accommodations would be things like extra time. And I found that, they do need extra time for reading or for writing. And often for reading comprehension, they've got to reread more than once and read a number of times to get adequate comprehension. Another point I'd like to make is that dyslexia is not related to intelligence. Although we use IQ tests, and I use an IQ test when I'm testing, but it's not to get an IQ score. I use an IQ test to get a profile, to see what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And that profile helps to inform the intervention program. So it's not necessarily related to intelligence. My definition of dyslexia, which is in most of my books, and as just what I've said already, it's a processing difference. So it's not really a deficiency or a disability, or it might not even be a difficulty. It's a difference in how they process information. And we've got to identify what that difference is and see how we can accommodate for it. It affects cognition, like memory, speed, processing, time management, and so on. There will be discrepancies. I had someone just a few days ago who had real difficulty with all aspects of reading, but his maths was in the superior range. It was actually right in the gifted range, in fact. So you might not find it as extreme as that, but you will find discrepancies, often between their reasoning, their understanding will be good, but their processing and their performances might be a lot lower. And also, you've got to appreciate individual differences, and we've got to recognise the context, the environment, the classroom environment, and the work environment for adults. So I'm just going to skip over this next slide. It's just the information processing cycle, and you can see I've actually mentioned most of these points already. But that's what we need to look at. We need to look at the challenges they've got for input, cognition, and output, and that will inform our teaching. I've got here some strategies for developing processing speed. I find that, I would say most of the children I assess and identify as dyslexic have got a difficulty with speed, but they need longer, they need more time to complete a task, sometimes even to understand the task, to read the task. So we've got to make sure that they've got the instructions correct. And the best way is just to give them that or to get them to say it back to you. We've got to minimise the anxieties about failing. So we can do that by making sure they can succeed with the task, or breaking the task down into small chunks. And all these would help with their processing speed. Because they're more on the task, they're more on task, they're less distracted, and also technology. There's some amazing programs that we could use for children with dyslexia, and they're increasing every day. And games and activities. So these could all help with, I always use games for processing speed. But at the same time, one of the important points is to ensure they have accommodation, like more time. Because sometimes they just can't get any faster, but they need more time to process information. It's as simple as that. In terms of the school, I mean, I've just said more time to complete tasks. And helping them to become more time aware by saying, right, this is 5 minutes to read through this, 5 minutes to plan the task, then do your writing, and then 5 minutes at the end to go over it. So try to make them give them more skills so they could acquire skills in time management. And I also think it's important to monitor that if you give them a task, you've got to monitor it sometimes every few minutes, just to make sure they don't go off a tangent, because I find that it's very easy for children with dyslexia just to go right off beam and go off at a tangent. So what I'm finding is that some schools are very dyslexia friendly, and they've really got it down to a fine art of the kind of making the environment very dyslexia friendly. The support is available. There is a very multisensory philosophy within the school. That information could be visual, it could be investigation, it could be kinesthetic, it could be role play, it could be looking at using technology, making differentiation of reality, staff training. But when you've got a school that's got all those things, different kinds of assessment available, not just written assessment, but projects, portfolios, discussion, oral assessment, making a range of different means of assessing competence. When you've got a school that's got all those things and you've also got a positive learning environment, you will find that dyslexic children will not struggle, but they'll get through. And you will also find other children will benefit from that as well, even though they're not dyslexic. So it's the whole school approach is very important. But there are intervention strategies, and I've got here 3 different types of strategies. One is the individualized approach, and that's the kind of multisensory phonic approaches that we use here, the Hickey program. In Canada, where I often work, we use the Orton-Gillingham approach. And any of these approaches, they're good, solid, multisensory approaches based on overlearning, based on phonics, and eventually they're very cumulative. So you start at step 1 and then gradually build up until you could read words automatically. And that's what you're trying to achieve, automaticity. The only problem is those individualist approaches need a highly skilled person to carry them out. And it also needs the child to be withdrawn from the class because they are usually one-on-one. So, but some children need that. But what I'm saying is that not all children with dyslexia will need that. So I'll go to number 2 here, support approaches. And that's what I've been more or less talking about since I started the talk, is differentiation, using computer programs, looking at things like paired reading, paired spelling, paired thinking, group work, peer tutoring, so one learner could help the other learner. And I do feel just getting the task right and making differentiation effective and adequate and right for that child will actually make a big difference. And the third approach here is cross-curricular approaches. And that's something that you could do with every child, but they will benefit children with dyslexia. Things like study skills, thinking skills, adapting their learning styles, looking at their learning styles, making them aware of the best way for them to learn. So when they go home and do their homework, they know the best way that they learn, either by even playing music in the background could be good. And there's some schools I deal with in Switzerland, and I go there quite a lot, that they go skiing. And that's one of their main curricular activities during the winter, and sport. I mean, all those things are actually good for a child with dyslexia because they're interacting, they're learning language, they're learning routines, they're learning rules, and they're picking all these things up. So they're all very important. 2 approaches I would like to just briefly highlight. And one is paired reading, which is reading together. So the adult or a child, in fact, but the adult would take the lead, and the dyslexic person would try to follow. But essentially, they should try and read at the same time. And I think paired reading works because the child can see the word, they could hear the word, and because the adult is reading with meaning, you can actually get more comprehension that way as well. So paired reading is something, in the school I am a consultant to in England, the Red Rose School, they do paired reading all the time, and I find it very effective. Another one is reciprocal reading, which helps with comprehension. That's when you take turns reading. So you could read, and then you ask a child something about what you've just said, and they read, and then they ask you some questions about what they've just read. And that way, by asking questions, it helps to clarify what they're reading. And it helps to develop the vocabulary and the concepts. And one of the key things about reciprocal reading, which is just coming on the screen at the bottom, is summarizing and making predictions. So at the end of the passage, or the paragraph in fact, you should say to the child, now could you summarize that? Maybe use one sentence. And if they could summarize it, they've understood it. They've got the key points. Or you could say, right, I'm going to turn the page now. I'm going to turn the page now. What do you think will come up next? You're going to be able to predict what's going to come up next. And that prediction, summarizing prediction, are very important there as well. And I put in some suggestions here, like what I find in a good classroom of papers for children with dyslexia. There'll be a lot of talk, a lot of discussion. There'll be a lot of drama. There'll be a lot of visual activities like drawing and anything. It's very visual. There'll be listening, but there will be structured listening. So the teacher won't speak for 15 minutes. They'll speak for maybe a few minutes and then get some feedback from the children of what they just said. And also, I think an effective classroom will acknowledge the feelings of the student, of the child. That they're looking at the whole person. They're not just looking at their test results. They're not just looking at what they've done, what they've learned, but they're looking at how they feel about what they've learned and how they feel about being in that classroom. So I think the whole thing about emotional literacy is very important as well. And I've just put down here on the next slide a whole pile of programs. These are programs used mainly in the UK, but are used elsewhere as well, like paired reading I've mentioned, a lot of technology like Co-Writer, spelling activities, a dictionary for spelling. It helps the dyslexic child how to learn to spell a word. Coloured overlays can be useful as well. And if you want some information on coloured overlays and visual aspects, the website on Crossbow Education, who won the SEN Resource of the Year, is excellent. So I'll put up all these slides here. And Jolly Phonics is used for synthetic phonics in the early years in the UK. WordShark. And I'm just Toe by Toe is a program that's used for adults as well as children, and it's been very effective. And I'll just put up Somerset thinking skills, anything to do with thinking, the Bono thinking skills, the Comp thinking skills. And Nessie is a program, a computer program that we use a lot in the UK. And also, very importantly, is self-esteem. Sorry, I'm just going to do it. Self-esteem. That the learner has got to be happy and aware and enjoying learning. Motivation is very important. Now, I'm just going to conclude now by going through some very brief key points. So one point is motivation. We've got to ensure that the child with dyslexia is motivated, that they're motivated intrinsically, that they want to do it, and if they can't, they've got some sort of rewards, either by getting a picture on the wall or the poster on the wall, but they've got to have some extrinsic motivation in order to get intrinsic motivation. Learning styles. It's important to be aware of how they learn best, whether they like bright lights or low lights, table lamp, or reading at night time, reading in the morning. So we need to be aware of that. And that's the classroom environment. Perhaps music. Some of the schools I go to, they've got music in every classroom in the background. And it's very soft music, but it helps to relax the student. And it gives a more informal learning culture. Classroom design. How the desks are arranged is very important as well. Memory. I think it's important to have some memory strategies. Look at things like mind mapping, different ways of taking notes, making connections between what they've learned and what they did last week and the week before. I mean, all these points help with memory. As I was saying earlier, the task is very important. The expectations is very important. We've got to make sure that our expectations match a child's abilities and what they can do. And very important to get the child really feeling good. If they feel good, they will do good. So the feel-good factor, the social emotional factors is very important. For a teacher, things like classroom management, meeting the needs of all, how to develop individual educational plans, they're all very important as well in order to manage a wide range of abilities, a wide range of children really in the class, as well as dyslexic children. So I think effective learning, as I said at the beginning, stems from an effective school. So it's not one teacher's responsibility, it's a whole school responsibility. It's actually the government's responsibility in a sense. So it's really the whole community that's got to be involved in this. But the school climate and the school ethos is very important. We need to help to encourage children with dyslexia to reflect. So when they do a task, they could say, I did that very well, or I could have done that better if I'd done that, or if I'd used this. So they need to be able to reflect about their own learning. That's very important. And this slide here, I think, sums it up. A good teacher makes you think, even when you don't want to. That they will inspire. What we're trying to do is to inspire children with dyslexia. And myself and a colleague, we've written quite a number of books, but there's 2 here, 100 ideas for primary and secondary, which is really full of strategies and ideas. And there's one down here in the corner in Italian, and it's this book here for parents in Italian. And I'll just, if I could just maybe speak to the audience now for a minute. Okay? Right. So I've just gone through this very, very quickly because it's a limited time. But I hope I've been able to identify some of the key points. And maybe you as teachers or as professionals can actually follow those up. But please feel free to email me. My email address will be in the handout. If you have any questions or any issues or anything you'd like to find out more about. But I've also got a website which you can find just by drgavinreid.com, and there's some handouts and some things to download on my website as well. So thank you all very much for listening, and I again apologise for not being there. So thank you.